The sound of heels clacking against concrete reverberated up our driveway like gunfire. I looked up from cleaning my car to see her striding toward us, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. Her impeccably styled blonde hair swayed with each forceful step, and her face was contorted into what I can only describe as rehearsed fury. "Excuse me," she screeched, pointing a manicured finger at my wife's SUV. "That vehicle is illegally parked. I'm contacting the police right now to have you detained immediately." My wife, who had been sorting gear in the back of her SUV, slowly turned around. The afternoon sun glinted off the badge on her belt as she moved. She said nothing at first, just reached down and unclipped her sheriff's badge, holding it up so the light reflected off its golden surface. "Ma'am," my wife said in her calmest professional tone, "I am Sheriff Rebecca Thompson of Pine Valley County. Is there something I can assist you with?" The woman's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but only for a moment. Then her eyes narrowed and she gripped her clipboard even tighter. 3 weeks earlier, Rebecca and I had moved into our dream home on Maple Ridge Court. After years of apartment living, we were ecstatic to finally have our own driveway, a proper backyard, and some tranquility. The neighborhood seemed ideal with its tree-lined streets and well-kept homes. We had barely finished unpacking when the first knock came. I opened the door to find a woman in her mid-40s wearing what looked like business attire from a bargain store. She thrust a packet of papers at me before I could even say hello. "I'm Sandra Peaton, president of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association," she announced with a tone that suggested I should be awed. "These are the community guidelines. I suggest you study them carefully. We have standards here." I thanked her and tried to close the door, but she wedged her foot against it. "I couldn't help but notice your mailbox," she said, craning her neck to look past me. "It's black. Our approved colors are forest green or burgundy. You'll need to replace it within 72 hours. "We just moved in," I said, trying to keep my voice civil. "We'll look into it." Her eyes narrowed. "And your grass is already looking a bit overgrown. We maintain a 2 3/4 inch maximum height. I trust you have a ruler." After she finally left, Rebecca and I chuckled about it over dinner. We had heard tales of overzealous HOA presidents, but Sandra seemed like a caricature. We figured if we kept a low profile and followed most of the rules, she would move on to harass someone else. We were mistaken. Over the next 2 weeks, Sandra found reasons to visit our house almost daily. Our trash cans were placed at the wrong angle. Our garden hose was visible from the road. We had parked our cars too close together in our own driveway, but it was the parking issue that truly enraged her. Rebecca often brought her patrol SUV home when she was on call, which was most nights. It was a requirement of her role. She needed to be able to respond instantly to emergencies. Sandra, however, saw it as her personal crusade to enforce what she claimed was a strict HOA rule against overnight parking in driveways. "This is a residential neighborhood, not a sheriff's department lot," Sandra said during her 5th visit about the issue. She stood at our door with her arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. Rebecca, still in her uniform after a grueling shift, tried to explain patiently. "Mrs. Peaton, this is a county vehicle. I'm required to have it accessible for emergency responses. It's not a personal choice." Sandra waved her hand dismissively. "I don't care if it's the governor's limousine. Rules are rules. Everyone in this neighborhood follows my regulations, law enforcement or not. You have 48 hours to find alternative parking arrangements." That's when the paper citations started appearing under our windshield wipers. They looked official at first glance, complete with fake violation codes and threatened penalties. Sandra had clearly spent time making them appear legitimate. She would stand in her driveway with her phone, snapping pictures of Rebecca's SUV at all hours. One morning, I caught her measuring the distance between our vehicle and the sidewalk with an actual tape measure. When I asked what she was doing, she informed me that vehicles must be exactly 18 inches from the garage door, no more, no less. "This is harassment," Rebecca said that evening, looking through the stack of fake citations. "I've dealt with actual criminals who were less relentless than this woman." We tried ignoring her, but Sandra escalated. She started calling the HOA's approved towing company, though they always refused once they saw it was an official sheriff's vehicle. She sent emails to the entire neighborhood about the commercial vehicle, parked on Maple Ridge Court. She even tried to organise a petition, though most neighbours politely declined to sign once they learned the vehicle belonged to the county sheriff. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. Rebecca had just returned from a particularly tough call involving a multi-car accident. She was exhausted, still in uniform, and just wanted to grab a quick dinner before potentially being called out again. That's when we heard the sound of a diesel engine in front of our house. Through the window, I saw a tow truck backing up toward Rebecca's SUV. The driver was already out, beginning to position the lift arms under the vehicle. Rebecca's exhaustion vanished instantly. She marched out the front door with a kind of purpose that made suspects think twice about running. The tow truck driver, a young guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, froze when he saw a uniform. "Sir, step away from the vehicle," Rebecca said in her authoritative voice. She held up her badge. "I'm Sheriff Thompson. This is an official county vehicle. You touch it, and I'll cite you for interference with law enforcement operations under State Vehicle Code Section 1245. The driver's hands shot up like he was being arrested. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I was just told to tow an illegally parked vehicle. The lady who called said she was the HOA president and had full authority." "She does not have authority to tow a law enforcement vehicle," Rebecca said firmly. "I suggest you leave before I have to write this up." The driver practically ran back to his truck. As he was pulling away, Sandra came charging across her lawn, cell phone pressed to her ear. "Don't you dare leave," she screamed at the retreating tow truck. "I'm calling 911 right now. This woman is impersonating an officer and threatening innocent workers." Rebecca rubbed her temples. "Mrs. Peaton, please don't call 911 for a non-emergency. You're going to tie up resources that might be needed for actual emergencies." But Sandra was already shouting into her phone. "I need police here immediately. Someone claiming to be law enforcement is threatening people in my neighborhood. She's probably armed." Within 10 minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled up. I watched from the doorway as the deputies got out, hands relaxed but alert. Then they saw Rebecca, and their entire demeanor changed. "Sheriff Thompson," the younger deputy said, clearly surprised. "We got a call about someone impersonating an officer." Rebecca nodded towards Sandra, who was still clutching her phone. "Mrs. Peaton here tried to have my county vehicle towed and called you when I identified myself." The senior deputy, a sergeant by his stripes, turned to Sandra with barely concealed irritation. "Ma'am, did you call 911 to report the actual county sheriff?" Sandra's face went through several shades of red. "I didn't know she was really... How was I supposed to know? She parks illegally. She violates HOA rules. Someone needs to do something." "Ma'am," the sergeant said slowly, "making a false 911 call is a misdemeanor. Attempting to have a law enforcement vehicle illegally towed could be considered interference with police operations. Do you understand the situation you've created here?" Sandra sputtered and stammered, but no coherent words came out. The deputies took statements from everyone, including the tow truck driver, who had circled back to add his version of events. He confirmed that Sandra had claimed to have full legal authority to tow any vehicle she deemed in violation. "She said she didn't need a court order or nothing," the driver told the sergeant. "Said the HOA rules were like laws, and she could enforce them however she wanted. To be honest, she calls us about twice a week for different houses. We usually just drive by and tell her we can't tow without proper documentation." The sergeant's eyebrows rose. "Twice a week?" The word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. By the next morning, emails were flying between homeowners who had all apparently been victims of Sandra's aggressive tactics. The HOA board called an emergency meeting for that Saturday. The community center was packed. I had never seen so many of our neighbors in one place. Sandra sat at the board table, arms crossed, glaring at everyone who entered. Rebecca and I found seats near the back. The board president, an elderly man named Harold, who clearly wished he was anywhere else, called the meeting to order. What followed was 3 hours of complaints about Sandra, fake citations, harassment, towing threats, and bizarre rules she had apparently invented on the spot. One neighbor produced a citation for having their garbage cans at a 43-degree angle instead of 45-degree. She measured it with a protractor, the man said, holding up the citation, at 6 o'clock in the morning. Another neighbour revealed that Sandra had been signing contracts with service providers without board approval, including a violation inspection service that turned out to be her nephew with a clipboard. When it was Rebecca's turn to speak, she stood with a quiet authority that commanded respect in any room. "I've been in law enforcement for 15 years, she began. "I've dealt with drug dealers, violent criminals, and organized crime. But I have never encountered someone who so blatantly abuses their perceived authority as Mrs. Peaton." She went on to explain the legal differences between HOA rules and actual laws, the requirements for towing vehicles, and the penalties for false 911 calls. "HOA rules can never supersede state and local laws," she concluded, "and they certainly don't give anyone the right to harass their neighbours or misuse emergency services." Sandra tried to defend herself, claiming she was just trying to maintain property values and standards. But when Harold asked her to produce the official HOA bylaws that supposedly banned driveway parking, she couldn't, because, as it turned out, no such rule existed. "I was going to propose it at the next meeting," she said weakly. The board voted unanimously to remove Sandra from her position, effective immediately. They also voted to ban her from holding any HOA position for 5 years and to send formal apology letters to all affected homeowners. As the meeting concluded, Sandra stood up so fast her chair tipped over. Her face was purple with rage. "You'll all regret this when your property values plummet," she shrieked. "When this neighbourhood turns into a parking lot. When there's chaos in the streets." She stormed toward the exit, but stopped at our row. For a moment, I thought she might actually take a swing at one of us. Instead, she leaned in close and hissed, "This isn't over." Rebecca stood up slowly, towering over the smaller woman. "Mrs. Peaton, I suggest you think very carefully about your next actions. The district attorney is already reviewing whether to file charges for your false 911 call and attempted illegal towing. I would hate to see additional harassment charges added to that list." Sandra's mouth opened and closed a few times before she spun on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. A week later, I was getting the mail when I noticed something crumpled in the back of our mailbox. It was a single sheet of paper with "I'm sorry" scrawled across it in what looked like Sandra's handwriting. Attached was a photocopied page from the HOA bylaws, with a section about parking that had been obviously added in different ink, then crossed out. It seems Sandra had actually amended the bylaws just to target Rebecca, forging the addition after the fact. It was the final nail in her coffin. When the board discovered this, they voted to pursue legal action for fraud. Sandra was facing up to $10,000 in fines and potential criminal charges. The last time I saw her, she was loading boxes into her car, her house bearing a "for sale" sign. When she noticed me watching, her face crumpled, and for just a moment, I saw not the neighborhood tyrant, but a woman who had lost everything over a parking space. She drove away without a word, her reign of terror ending with a whimper rather than a bang. Rebecca pulled into our driveway that evening, parking her sheriff's SUV exactly where she always had. We stood together looking at the spot that had caused so much drama. $10,000 in fines, Rebecca said, shaking her head. All because she couldn't mind her own business. I wrapped my arm around her. Think she learned her lesson? Rebecca laughed, the sound echoing across our peaceful cul-de-sac. People like Sandra never learn. They just find new neighborhoods to terrorize. She paused, then added with a grin, though I bet she'll think twice before trying to tow a sheriff's vehicle again. As we headed inside, I couldn't help but feel a little sorry for Sandra's next neighbors, wherever they might be. But mostly, I was just glad our driveway drama was finally over. The new HOA president, Harold, had already stopped by to assure us that actual cops were always welcome in Maple Ridge Court. "Besides," he'd said with a wink, "it's nice knowing the sheriff lives in the neighborhood. Makes everyone feel a bit safer." Everyone, that is, except former HOA presidents who didn't know when to quit.